Hello, I'm Liam and this is my allotment tour for the start of September. It shows exactly how my allotment is now, but it also reviews what I've been doing at the allotment throughout August. I've divided this video into chapters, and below the video you can see the individual sections. If you want to see what's in the video, this is the best way of doing this. Or if you've already seen the video and want to come back and see an individual section, this allows you to do this. For more content on growing fruits and vegetables, please see my website. There'll be a link below the video. If you like this video, please let me know by leaving a comment or hitting the like button. And to receive updates when I post new videos, please subscribe to the YouTube channel in the usual way. August has been a strange month weather-wise. The first 2 weeks of the month was blisteringly hot, and since then we've had some really strong winds and lots of rain. So let's take a look. This is an example of a typical harvest I've been taking back from the allotment twice a week over August. I have some runner beans here, which are a lovely colour helped by the rain that we've been having, and a few really nice looking chard leaves. Some of the chard leaves have been eaten by slugs and snails, but at the moment I have a few plants that are thankfully free of being eaten. Some good examples there. I have some tomatoes, regular sized tomatoes, which are a lovely colour. I'm really pleased with those. A few raspberries. The raspberry canes this year are recovering from what happened to them the year before. The harvests are very small, but at least I get the opportunity to remember what they taste like. A large winter squash. The winter squash I've been picking individually because I walk the winter squashes home, and taking one home at a time is really all I can manage. The cauliflower that I have just picked, and behind the cauliflower are 3 gorgeous looking courgettes. Unfortunately, I broke the top off one when I was taking it off the plant, but they're a great size and a very clean fruit. Behind that, I have some more tomatoes and a few strawberries. The strawberries have been affected by all the rain over the last few days, and I ended up throwing perhaps twice the number I've got here in the tub because they've gone soft. And then finally, over here, I have some beetroot, 2 different varieties, purple coloured and an orange variety. Beetroot stores well, but at this time of year I think it goes deliciously in soups, perhaps combined with the cauliflower and the winter squash. I may also throw in some chard leaves too for extra flavour. At the beginning of the season I was harvesting cherry tomatoes. There are a few remaining to be picked, but a lot less than there were at the beginning of the season around June. Now the main crop are these full-size tomatoes, and I am really pleased with them. Today is an exciting day inside the Polytunnel because these Premio tomatoes, I've been eyeing these Premio tomatoes for the last fortnight, maybe the last month actually, and now I reckon they're ready for harvest. They're a really nice clean base to them, a lovely size, almost a couple of inches across and perfectly round. And I think they're full of juice. So I'm looking forward to using them in tomato salads, where I just put a little bit of olive oil and balsamic vinegar and a pinch of salt on them. But even better in a couple of Spanish-inspired recipes, either gazpacho or salmorejo, which are delicious cold Spanish soups, largely using tomatoes, but a little bit of cucumber, perhaps a green pepper and a clove of garlic too. The cucumber plants are definitely past their best. There are signs of mould on the leaves. Throughout August I was getting perhaps 2 to 3 cucumbers a week. Now, if I am lucky, I'm getting 1 cucumber a week. And to be honest, looking at these plants, I think my cucumber harvest is about to come to an end. If I just look under the leaves here, it should be possible to see a couple of cucumbers forming there. I may just reach to see if I can grab one. And there we go, that's a variety called Mini Muncher, ideal for a lunchtime sandwich. Moving outside the polytunnel, the big change is that I have taken down the globe artichoke plant. This is all that remains of the globe artichoke plant now. It's just a stump in the ground. Over winter I'm going to dig up the plant entirely because the plant is well past its best. It's at least 10 years old. I haven't decided how I'll use the space. But for now I'm enjoying looking at the polytunnel again because the globe artichoke was really blocking quite a lot of light coming into the polytunnel, and also the light reaching the solar panel, which I use to power the drip irrigation system. Immediately to the right of the polytunnel, I have my winter squash, which is now providing excellent ground cover. And poking through the winter squash, I have some asparagus plants that I will dig up. My intention is to dig up all the remaining spears and put something else next to the polytunnel. I've been really pleased with how my line of raspberries is maturing. These canes are recovering from last year, where due to neglect, the bed was completely overrun with weeds. My main task has been tying up the raspberry canes to protect them from strong winds. These canes are nearly 6 feet in height, and I'm hoping that in early summer next year we'll produce lots of fruit. In the gaps in the line of raspberries, I've taken the opportunity to plant one winter squash, which is what has filled the gap between the polytunnel and the line of raspberries, and also some runner beans. These runner beans have grown really well. The runner beans here are between 3 and 4 feet in height. These were very late sowing. I put them in the ground at the end of July, early August, but now they have plenty of flowers on them. I really like the look of runner bean flowers. I think they're an absolutely gorgeous colour. And I've also got a second set of runner beans which are here. Now I'll need to stand back because these have fallen over. The strong winds have really taken effect on my runner beans. They're so heavy now with all the leaf mass. The canes I've been using are these plastic coated steel canes, and they're excellent for supporting individual plants, but they're just not strong enough to act as I want them to a line of runner bean plants with lots of leaves on them. What I'm planning to do instead is to buy some more of these steel poles, galvanized steel poles that I have on my fruit cage. They are much thicker, and I'll run a line of those steel poles all across the raspberries, and I think that will be sufficient to stop my plants and supports being blown over in strong winds. Next to my raspberries I have my line of hybrid berries. My Boysenberry plant here, which I only planted in the spring, is doing well. I've started to tie in the growth to the supports. Since their peak in June, the Loganberry and Tayberry plants I have here were in a real mess, with the old growth having grown through the netting I'd used to protect the fruit. And what I've done is to remove all the old fruited canes and tie in the new fruited canes to these supports in a fan shape. Next to the hybrid berries I have my fruit cage. At the moment it's not possible for me to get inside the fruit cage because I have a winter squash plant that is growing all over it and blocking the doorway. One of my jobs for the autumn is to get inside the fruit cage and to prune back the plants. I have 3 gooseberry bushes, 1 blackcurrant bush and 1 redcurrant bush. What I also want to do is to put a thick mulch around the base of the plants to feed them. The first bed next to the fruit cage is dedicated to my rhubarb plant that I only planted in the spring this year. And in the space next to it I planted some dahlias. The dahlias are still producing wonderful flowers that I've been cutting and taking home to decorate the house. The rhubarb itself is looking very healthy, has enormous leaves and hasn't started to die back yet. But when it does start to die back, I'll put a thick mulch around its base to feed it. To the right hand side of the rhubarb plant I had a few potatoes. These have already been dug up. It is now Friday the 7th of August and I'm now going to have the first go at digging up some potatoes. The bed I'm choosing is the first bed I planted and it's next to my rhubarb plant. I hope this is coming out well on the camera. I planted my potatoes about 6 inches underneath the ground in a trench and then covered the trench with soil, and since then I've been earthing up the potatoes. All in all, I've needed to dig down about 1.5 foot, maybe 2 feet to get to the potatoes, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4 potatoes visible there, and I hope several more potatoes underneath the main part of the plant. This is the result of digging up my first 2 potato plants. I'm quite pleased with the harvest. One of the plants went over a little earlier than the others. It may not actually be representative. I hope the other plants may actually provide a little more. 1 or 2 of them, I think this is a good example, have actually I thought that was scab, but that may actually be flaky skin, but this potato here has a little piece of scab on it. But overall, they're a good size. That one, that's got a bit, that has a rotten end to it, so I'll discard that one. I find it's important before storing potatoes to make sure that I've spotted any potatoes which aren't in good condition, because then it can spoil the other potatoes. Overall, I'm pleased with this. A few good sized potatoes, one really quite large potato. The other potatoes are all of a good size to make peeling them worthwhile. I think this bed here, which was, as I said, the first bed I planted, when I looked at the growth of the plants, wasn't the strongest growing of my potato bed. So I'm hopeful that my other potatoes beds will give me more potatoes per plant. But overall, I'm very happy to take these home. The protection I've put on top of my strawberry bed has been a big success. It's now the 1st of August and this is the strawberry harvest. I'm holding one of the largest strawberries, great size that one. And this one too, almost sort of twice the width of my thumb, and another good one. Even though these are day neutral strawberries, they are the size of a normal size strawberry, which, considering these were seedlings planted, I think February, possibly March, certainly no later than March. They've only had a few months growth, 5 or 6 months of growth, and they're already producing really, really great sized strawberries. I've looked around the edge of the cage which is protecting the strawberries, and the cage, the mesh, which is 2.6 millimeters thick, so the thick mesh is doing its job. There's absolutely no sign of any animal attack on the mesh at all. It's clearly working, and the investment of buying the mesh has paid off, at least for the moment. Perhaps the biggest success of my allotment this year has been this winter squash plant. This, together with the other winter squash plant by the Polytunnel, has produced 14 fruits so far. There are still fruit forming on the plants. The vigour of the plants is shown by how they're currently climbing over my fruit cage. I'm allowing the plants to climb over the fruit cage because I'm going to change the netting over the winter, so I don't mind if it damages this netting to a degree. The reason why I'm changing the netting is that rats were biting through the plastic netting, and I need to put some wire around the fruit cage to better protect the bushes inside. But if I move closer, it's possible to see just how vigorous this winter squash plant is. It's grown right up from the base of the fruit cage to the top, which is over 2 meters in height. And the fruit is forming on the plant as it grows up the fruit cage. The fruit is a really good size. It is wider than the width of my hand, and the largest fruits are about 4 kg in weight. They're green on the outside, or green skin on the outside. When it dries to a lighter colour, almost a beige colour, and the flesh inside the fruit is this gorgeous orange colour. And I had some for dinner last night, and it tastes absolutely delicious roasted. This is my collection of winter squash that I have been harvesting from the allotment. I'm storing them along a wall because at the moment my shed is too warm during the day and that would risk spoiling the fruit. But when the weather cools, then I'll move them and store them on a shelf in the shed. They're protected here, but I'm storing them on their side because when it rains, instead of the rain pooling around the plant where it used to connect to the main stem, the water will simply run off, keeping the squash nice and dry. You can see all the squash I have lined up here. There are 13 squash in all. I'm really happy with this collection of squash. With luck, if they store well inside the shed, these squash will store until February next year. I'm getting quite excited now about the apples that are forming on the fruit tree. It's been a good surprise that the apples have been able to withstand the strong winds I've had here over the last couple of weeks. If I move a little closer, I have 6 apples in total remaining on the apple tree. This is the first season. I only planted the apple tree in February, March this year. I'll check the variety. It's Apples Kids Orange Red. Looking at the size of the apples, they're a good size. They're definitely large enough for picking, but I'm going to leave them on the tree a little longer because looking at their colour, they're slightly yellow looking, and I think when they mature they'll have red patches on the skin, which should mean that they're at full sweetness. Immediately next to the winter squash plant, I have 2 beds full of potatoes. The plants have fallen over, and if it hadn't been for the really wet weather I've had here over the last couple of weeks, I would have already have dug them out of the ground. This is one of my priorities for the next couple of weeks, to make sure I get all the potatoes up. Next to the potato beds, I have this bed full of courgettes. Now, there are only 3 plants here, and I didn't plant the courgettes until July, and since then the plants have grown enormously and fruited copiously. If I just get into the plants, I hope to be able to show some fruit which are forming. I hope this is coming out on the camera, but there are 2 courgettes forming there. This plant here is a yellow courgette variety. And in the middle here, I have a green courgette variety, and it should be possible to see a small green courgette forming there with the flower on the end of it. Next to my courgette plants, I have been turning my attention to winter vegetables, and this bed here used to contain my shallots. I prefer growing shallots to onions because I think I get a bigger harvest from shallots, because one set produces a bunch of onions rather than just one big onion. And also when I cook using shallots, I find them a better size, because whereas when I cook with an onion I tend to use the whole onion, with a shallot I can use 1, 2, 3, depending on how much I want to put in the meal. Looking at it, it's about 1 wheelbarrow's worth of shallots, and they are of different sizes. So some of them are measuring, I reckon, a couple of inches across, but the smaller scale, this one here, is maybe 1.5 centimetres across and a couple of centimetres high. They're not all perfect, and that's one of the things I think of growing your own food. You do get the whole range, you get some really sort of marvellous specimens, but the biggest aren't always the tastiest. But overall, what I really like about growing shallots is that they store well. But by drying out the shallots and then storing them in a cool and dry environment, they'll store for many months. and sometimes I've been successful storing them till March, April time. What I've also done is to dig over the bed where the shallots were. I just gave them a quick once over. One of the reasons why I dug over with the shallots is that when the shallots die back, it's not always obvious where the shallots are. When I dug over the ground, I actually found another couple of bunches that I had missed when I had done the original picking. But now the ground is like this. It's ready for my winter vegetables. I've since replanted the bed. I put down some biodegradable weed fabric and planted some cabbage and broccoli through the weed control fabric. And I'm very happy with how quickly the plants have become established and how healthy they're looking. The plants at the front are a pointed winter cabbage. And behind them, these are my broccoli plants, which are growing taller. As the plants grow, I'll need to provide them with more support. I'm going to put stakes around these plants and tie the plants to the stakes, because if I don't do that over winter, strong winds will blow over the plants and potentially break the stems. Another winter vegetable bed I have next to the courgette plants are my leeks. The leeks, with all the rain, are really starting to fill out. They won't be ready for the autumn, but I didn't want them to be ready for the autumn. I'm growing these leeks to be ready for March, April time, and I'm really happy with how they're looking now. I did have a couple of leek plants that didn't make it from the first sowing, and I replanted from the seedlings that I kept in reserve in case that happened. I'm not entirely sure why I lost a couple of plants. I think the reason was because the planting hole was a little dry, or the roots were too small and the plants never became established. So when I replanted the seedlings, I gave them extra water, and that seemed to make the difference. My parsnip bed has got a little out of control. A few plants have gone to seed. I think the plants that have gone to seed are actually the beetroots I planted in between the parsnip plants. Let me just take a look. If I give this plant a big pull, yeah, there we go. If I just step back here, I'll lift it up. That is actually a beetroot plant that has gone to seed. It's huge. Wow, look at that. One beetroot plant absolutely covered in flowers. It's probably over 1 metre wide and 1 metre tall. By removing that one plant, it provides much more light and space to the remaining plants. In the parsnip bed, I also have some chard plants that are still providing a few leaves, and along this side here, an orange variety of beetroot. All in all, this bed has been very productive, but I'm really growing parsnips to provide a harvest in autumn. They're delicious roasted, and I think they also make an excellent ingredient for soup. The New Zealand spinach bed, I really need to tidy this up. Within the bed, I have some chard plants, and these leaves are actually looking in pretty good condition. And here I have what looks to be a butterfly resting on the leaves. But I'm growing enough plants that when leaves are eaten, it's not a problem. There are plenty more leaves to pick. This side here, I have some beetroots. The beetroot here are a good size, and over the last few weeks I've been able to regularly pick beetroot. Beetroot stands really well on the allotment. I leave it in place, and I'm hoping throughout autumn I'll be able to come down to the plots and pick beetroot when I need it. The New Zealand spinach itself is now a tremendous size. It's spilling out over the sides of the bed. I find that New Zealand spinach is easy to grow. It's well suited to my dry soil here, and it's probably my favourite variety of spinach to grow. I'm now going to pick some New Zealand spinach. I've been really pleased with how the New Zealand spinach has grown this year. 4 plants have filled half of one of my raised beds. I really like the taste of the leaves. Certainly when cooked, I think it tastes the same as normal spinach. And this is it, 1 bag full of New Zealand spinach, lots of leaves here. To give an idea of the size of the leaf, it's a little bit smaller than the palm of my hand. I'm actually stopping picking now because I think it's about to pour down with rain, but I'm really pleased with this harvest, and I've had a number of bags of this size from those 4 plants, so I'm really pleased with the harvest. Next to my leeks, I have my Brassica bed. I've already dug up 1 cauliflower from this bed, and I hope to have a couple more cauliflower to come. It's now the end of August, and I noticed today, looking at my cauliflowers, that one has formed a head. Let me see if I can move the camera so it's possible to see. Hopefully this is coming out on the camera. The leaves have started to peel away from the head, which means it's time for picking. It's time to lift the net up and see what I've got. That's the net removed, and now I'm going to pull up the cauliflower. If I get my hand under here, give it a good tug, knock off a lot of the earth. That's the cauliflower, but it's not possible to see the size of the head yet, so I'm going to start removing the leaves. I think this cauliflower is a little smaller than the ones I was able to grow last year. I don't know if that's because the ground was slightly less rich or because we've had such hot weather this year, and it could also be that the caterpillars and slugs and snails have been enjoying the plants, and maybe that's taken some of the energy away and shortened the growing season. And that's it, 1 head of cauliflower. Now, cauliflower doesn't store well on the plot. If I hadn't picked it, then potentially the head would have blown, which would have meant that these florets here would explode out of the head. My plan is to take this home, perhaps to enjoy the cauliflower steamed, or even as an ingredient to a soup. At the front of the bed, in the spaces that I had left over, I've got a couple of cabbage plants. These have been eaten by caterpillars. Somehow butterflies got inside the netting. This 1 plant here is looking good at the moment, but I'll just have to wait and see whether that one gets eaten too. Behind the cauliflower plants, I have kale. The kale plants are now enormous. What I've been doing is ripping off a few leaves whenever I've wanted to make a stir fry. Next to the New Zealand spinach bed, I have another bed full of potatoes. This is an example of how wild my potato beds have become. I have a real problem with mare's tail, which throughout the season I just pick the heads off. The roots go 2 feet deep. I really need to get into the bed and dig up the potatoes. That's what I've done with the potato bed next to it. Yesterday I came down to the plot and lifted all the potatoes from this bed. I need to get more beds looking like this because I want to plant more winter vegetables, perpetual spinach, winter cabbage, spring greens, and I need room to plant my garlic for overwintering. And at the far end of my allotment, I have my blueberry bushes. In some summers at this time of year, the blueberry bushes have already lost their leaves, but because of all the rain we've had throughout August, it's really extended their growing season. What this means is that the plants have continued to grow, and hopefully this will mean that next year I'll have even more blueberries off the plants. To recap my September tour of the allotment, at the far end here I have my line of blueberry bushes. Next to my blueberry bushes I have a couple of beds of potatoes. 1 bed that I have already dug up all the potatoes from, and the bed next to it that I still need to do. Alongside my potato bed I have my Brassica bed that contains some cabbage, cauliflower and kale. and at the far end there, my New Zealand spinach bed that also contains beetroot and chard. Moving along, I have my leek bed, and beyond my leek bed, I have my parsnip bed that also contains beetroot and chard. Next to my leek bed, I have my courgettes. Beyond the courgettes, I have some winter vegetables, my cabbage plants and broccoli. And to the left of the courgettes, I have a couple of beds full of potatoes that need to be dug up. Next to the potatoes is my strawberry bed, and next to that is my rhubarb bed. The rhubarb bed also has a couple of dahlia plants in it, and to the right hand side there was a small row of potatoes. Beyond the strawberry bed, I have the space which is dedicated to my enormous winter squash plant, and poking through the winter squash plant is my apple tree. The winter squash plant is growing over my fruit cage, and if I move to the other side of my fruit cage, it's possible to see the hybrid berries. A Tayberry plant, a Loganberry plant and a Boysenberry plant. And next to that, I have my raspberry row, which contains another winter squash plant and some runner beans that have unfortunately been blown over in strong winds. And the space between my raspberry row and the polytunnel is occupied by the winter squash plant. And popping up through the winter squash plant is asparagus. And at the far end of my allotment is the polytunnel, and the polytunnel contains my tomatoes and a few cucumber plants. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel by clicking the subscribe button. After subscribing, click the bell to ensure you are notified every time a new video is added.